This is an exciting one because we're talking about third-party audits. And we're going to get into the ISO 9000 program. And as you can see, we're talking about the ISO 9000, 14, 1348, aerospace, because they're all built on the same system. That's the exciting part about it. So let's take a look at what we got here. The audit key is always section 9.3. That's in the standard. I'm going to bring that up in a second so you can take a look at it, you know. But section 3 is the biggie, and why is that? Because management review defines certain things that have to be addressed. Simple as that. And the review of the ISO 9000 requirements, like I said, the 10 sections there are the same for all of them. Everything is based on that. And we were talking about the 14,000, same thing. The key is knowing what's going to happen during the audit. And as you can see, we have the CEO is interviewed. The CFO, usually they drop in. They really don't want to hear anything about money. They're more interested in the CEO, Chief Executive Officer. They'll look at sales, marketing, sales, go from marketing and sales to shipping and delivery through the company. They're going to talk to the individuals. The managers, most auditors don't really want to talk to the managers because they usually get a song and dance, you know, and it's like any business. You know, if you talk to a politician, you're going to get a song and dance. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. If I go down and actually talk to the person who does the job, I'll find out exactly what's going on. And what are your answers? What your answer should be is interesting, because you have to understand the standard and what the question is in the context of the question. The ISO 9000, here's the index. I put the index on here so that you can have a pretty good view of what's going on. So let's take a look. We're going to go through there as an auditor does. And we go through, and number one, understanding who you are. And that's easy because what it amounts to is who's your customers? What do we do? What are the regulatory and statutory requirements that we have to uphold? Granted, we have the customer requirements, but there's also statutory and regulatory requirements, right? Federal, state, local standards, everything's involved. And understanding the quality management system, we set up a system and so forth. So this is the first step. And this is interesting. Like if you was in a new business, this is the key. And then the next one down here, let's talk about leadership. We have to establish leadership. And I always put the lines of responsibility and authority. They have to be well defined. A lot of times they're not well defined. You know, it's sort of like Louis over in receiving doesn't communicate well with purchasing. So they're doing their job to get the products in there and do it right. The problem is they're not communicating with each other. Sometimes receiving is just looking at the POs and they know certain things have to be done that's not on the purchase order. So establish lines of responsibility and authority. It's not strictly upper management, it's all departments, right down to the bottom, the people who actually make the money. Like I said, the individuals that make the money are the ones who build the product. Planning. When we're planning a company, we have to figure out what's our pulse. What's the pulse of the company going to be? And that's our objectives. Our objectives are things that we're going to pick, and you'll see them come up a little bit later on. But our objectives are the things that we have to quantify. And we also want to take a look at them for our measurement of right and wrong. CFOs, a lot of time, like they say, they look at numbers, but there's a lot of numbers we don't give him that happen on the floor every day in the production departments and things like that. And he would probably have more accurate understanding of what's going on if he knew exactly what wasted time and material was happening on the floor on a daily basis, you know? So, something to think about. Quality objectives, like I said, they have to be quantified and also identify risk and actions. our objectives, whatever they are, whether they be, you know, on-time delivery or this, we have to measure it. And we have to identify what the risk is based on the, like customers. If I base myself on the customer, the criticality of the product I produce or where it's going to go. Okay, if I'm producing something here that is not a very critical part, it's just a general part that goes out to the public and it doesn't have any military use, it doesn't have any medical use. In other words, if it fails, no one's going to die or a plane isn't going to crash, right? Resources here, and we have our HR, and she is responsible to make sure that number one, we have a load of employees with different skills that can produce the product on time, right? And produce it to the quality it needs to be. She's more in charge of people, okay, in the HR department. The environment, measurement, you handle environment also?
Yeah, thought of it.
Okay. Usually the HR is involved with a little bit of everything in there because it's about people, it's about resources, it's about material, equipment, and so forth. In other words, employees can't operate correctly unless they have the right tools. And her job is to make sure that they have them. And down below, documentation. Documentation, documentation, documentation. If I was going to say anything, I would say that your correct documentation is the way to go. Like today we do a lot of computer systems and so forth, which is nice, but a lot of times it's just checking a box or it's putting some kind of description in there that sometimes is a little brief and sometimes is just sort of, it gets dogmatic, especially when we're working with computers. We have our little phrases and sayings that we just pop in there because we do all the time, you know, it's sort of redundant. So we have to watch that and make sure that our documentation defines exactly what we do. Anybody remember what I said last time about documentation in reference to the company and the stability of the company and how it's looked at? Remember I talked about liability of the company? Our job is to have the documentation to protect the liability of the company. Anybody remember when I talked about that? I talked about number one is when we build the product, especially a real critical problem that's life-threatening or something that's highly critical, if something goes wrong, everyone wants to find out who did it, right? And unfortunately, we always want to look someplace other than where we are, right? So the same thing happens. For instance, what industry is one of our big clients in?
Gaming.
Who?
Gaming.
I didn't hear you.
Gaming.
Gaming. Oh. Set them up, Joe. Gaming. So anyway, the liability there is if by chance you did something that sort of messed that up and that company lost a lot of money because of your software, embedded software or hardware or something like that there, and we could point to you to blame, where are they going to recoup this money from? You know? Usually small amounts, they eat it, but when it gets to be really big, they're looking for you. And it's about documentation. If my documentation is solid, and I can show from the customer requirement that we followed everything you asked for. We followed your quality requirements, you followed your legal, we followed your, you know, everything else, and everything was the way you, you know, wanted us to do it. Liability goes back on them. But if I'm missing documentation is just as bad as misdocumentation, because that means, as far as anybody's concerned, you didn't do it. Okay? Well, we always do that. Show me objective evidence. Objective evidence. Documents. Let's look another section of the standard here. Now we're getting into Section 8. If you remember last week I talked about Section 8. Section 8 is sort of like your manufacturing or your operation side. So far we dealt with Section 1 through 7, which was the company's structure on how to handle people, leadership and management, resources, and so forth, right? Now we're getting into what do, how we make it. First thing here, section 8, like I said, section 8 is the meat and potatoes, contract review. So when I look at section 8, there it is, right? And the interesting thing about standards and specifications, you have to be able to interpret what they're asking you. Most of these standards and specifications were written by lawyers because or people who have a law background, because it's about wording, how we're going to word it where we don't make ourselves liable, but we give you the opportunity to come up with a system to protect your liability. So if you notice, customer communications, an order comes in, it's a statement of work, it's a PO, it doesn't make any difference what it is, as long as it's a order, right? Everyone knows a contract is, acceptance and consideration, right? Plus, well, consideration is money, acceptance is saying, so it's an offer, acceptance, and consideration. That's the total thing for a contract. If you get into any disputes and any one of them is missing, it's not a legal contract. In other words, if you give me something for free, it's not a contract. That's why you see people trading things and doing $1 because they need consideration. Determine the requirements, and like I said, this is all the contract. Review the requirements of the product or service. The standard always uses product and service. They're synonymous with each other. If I say product, it's referring to service if I just perform a service. Okay? Changes, so that's easy. Then we get into the, oh guys, we have any engineers here? He just snuck in the back door. See the way they did that? Our engineers, they have a different brain. Each one of us has a different mindset or a brain, the brain usage of information, depending on what we do, right? This guy up here, he comes up with the concept. He's a visionary. He says, I want this item. I want this gaming machine to do this, that, and that, right? So you have to come up with the software, the embedded hardware, whatever you do, embedded software, all this stuff. Doesn't make any difference. And then they turn it over to the engineer. Now he loves that. Engineers love that because they're gonna, oh yeah, let me see how I can create this monster, right? That's what he does. That's what his brain is for. And once that's developed and we get into the other stuff here, you're gonna see different brains, different people that are selected by HR to fill them positions because of their abilities. Simple as that, okay? So engineers, they're gonna develop a plan to build this thing. They're gonna come up with input information, and that's coming from the customer plus what they know. Like I said, if there's any regulatory or statutory requirements involved, they're gonna automatically put them into the mix. And then they're gonna look at the company's ability. What can we actually do in-house, and what do we have to do at a house? So forth. So the engineer is going to develop all that stuff. Develop, verify, and validate. I use them words because it's very important. Develop it, everyone understands that. They're going to develop a drawing, a specification, right? Verify, they have to verify that it's being done or the sequence of operations are done so that it makes sense putting it together. Validation means they have to test it. That's one of the key components of engineering. They have to validate it before they release it. And the validation is based on what the customer wanted. It's going to jump, it's going to fly, it's going to do cache, it's going to whatever it decides to do, you know, whatever the customer wants. That's how it works. But validate, if he doesn't validate it and puts it out on the floor and it doesn't meet all the customer requirements, statutory and regulatory requirements, liability, right? You guys look so serious. Did everyone get a little coffee this morning? Or did you eat a bunch of donuts? Okay, let's go to the next one here. Now, here's the sequence. We talked about that last time. We had the customer come in, and they came up and we wanted this, and then we had engineering. Our engineering department is going to design what that is. And then we get into the next section here. Once we design it, we have to get material to build it. Right? And this is purchasing, 8.4. If I look at that, it's purchasing and receiving in 8.4. What I'm trying to impress upon you is numbers mean a lot when you're an auditor. Because when we ask questions, we're asking it in the frame of these numbers right here. So when I'm talking to you, I have to convert this. Type in extended controls. The PO. You know, the PO I'm going to send out to the to buy the material to build this here has to be a certain way, you know, to meet the customer requirements. So the PO has to have everything it needs. Now, remember we dropped down a level. So usually the purchasing agent, he has a brain that can go all over the place. As soon as they reference a part or something like that, his brain is saying, oh, I know where I could get that. I know where I can get that there. I can get that there, right? And they create a PO. We have purchasing people in here. There you go. That's what she does. She gets all excited then, you know, and starts, right? And negotiating, that's what they love to do. Now, the other side of that is receiving it. Now, when I receive it, most of the time, receiving is not the same brain as a purchasing agent or the engineer. Different animal. The receiving person is there basically to safeguard, to make sure that everything she asked for is there. The quantities, the design, whether it needs certificate of conformance or analysis or whatever it needs, you know, defined by engineering, is what has to be on the PO. Okay? And nowadays it's pretty easy because we have the software. So normally it's punched in by you, right? You'll punch it in. So basically the receiving clerk receives a sheet of paper that says it requires, sometimes it says requires this to go to quality for an inspection, or this just requires to come in and go into our stock system, or you know, it's been, you know, in other words, she determines what exactly has to be on that PO. So that the the receiving guy doesn't really have to know how you did that. He has to know that I have to receive it and it has to have this documentation, it's got to have this configuration, it's got to have this marking, bam. And it goes to where she says it goes. Either it goes to the production floor or it's going to go out to stock. Am I right?
That's right.
Okay. Bam. Purchasing and receiving right here. Remember the auditor's brain? The auditor's brain is saying numbers, numbers. And when I get into the bigger section of this here, you can see how it expands. So this turns into probably a half a page. And it's going to get more specific on how to do that, the subcategories. Now, I have it. So now it's operations, manufacturing, product controls, post-delivery, and you guys create, if I remember right, a work order. You call it a work order? Okay, everybody calls it something different.
Sales order.
Sales order, okay. So you create the sales order, and that means that our production floor is going to have to bring in all the materials and everything, and make sure that all the prerequisites to make sure everything's there before you start assembling it. Otherwise you get halfway through and it's, you know, that doesn't work. And so here it is, and if you notice, control over production, and remember service and production are synonymous. Identify and traceability. An auditor always travels through the department down there where they're actually putting these together, and if I see anything on the table that doesn't have any identification or traceability, and meaning your sales order or some other kind of identification telling me what that is, I red flag it right away. You've lost control over product or material. In other words, when you split orders, I don't know if you do any splitting, you know, where one department has to build this, one has to build that under the same sales order. Do you do that?
No.
Huh?
No.
Okay. So basically it's all done in that one spot, which means that when I walk up there, I'm going to see a sales order. I'm going to see all the material on the, in front of that person that's part of the bill of material. Simple as that. And I'm going to look at it. And if it's something's missing or something doesn't seem right, I'll ask a question. Right? And down below is an interesting one. That's the control over product release. Rule of thumb, nothing goes out the door. Do you guys use acceptance tags for things going out the door? Or do you just use rejection tags for things that are either on hold or hold tags of things that can't go out the door?
Yeah, rejection tags.
Okay. So if it doesn't have a rejection tag, we're assuming it's okay. Okay. And if we see a rejection tag, we know it's not going out the door. And then it says control of non-conforming outputs. Two terms, non-conforming output, there's non-conformities and there's non-conforming product. You're going to see that come up in the sections. When we talk about this non-conforming output, we're talking about, obviously, product. Okay, mostly. It doesn't say non-conforming product because, theoretically speaking, it could be a process that failed. Right? So if I use a red tag, we're talking about product. If I use a corrective action form, we're talking about process. We agree? Okay. Okay, release of product and services. And this is another fun one here. Remember, we had sales and marketing. We set up a company. We had sales and marketing. We had contract review. We had engineering get involved. We had purchasing get the material. We had receiving material. And then we had Section 8, which is the operations. They're putting it all together. Now, this is a key in everything. It's saying performance evaluation. This is a whole section telling us that we have to determine how well we do. Remember when we talked about the control panel on an aircraft? If you're flying blind, you're in this room here, you're flying blind. If you're running this company, you're blind. You don't see anything. All you have to rely on is data, right? And returns, complaints, customer praises. Sometimes they say you're wonderful. Sometimes they say you're not. Okay? And we keep track of that because we want more wonderfuls than we want more nots. Okay? Analysis, evaluation. Evaluate. Most of our software system will do that. But you have to be very careful. Like I said, the thing about software that does all this, it doesn't have eyes. It doesn't see. That means that whatever you put in there in verbiage or in checking a box or something like that has no, no meat to it. It's a number and we're just hoping it's right. So bottom line of this whole system is here, quality assurance, operations, wherever you are on the floor looking and seeing what's going on. You have to get out of your cubicle at least 2-3 times a day and walk the floor. In my business, and where I come from, when I trained my employees, when I was a director of one of the companies, I would just, every one of my departments, if they didn't get out of their cubicle and walk that floor and find out what was going on in the day with the people they're relating to, or just generally be known who they are when they work in an office, that was something I would really push, because there's got to be a face. There's got to be a face to purchasing. There's got to be a face to receiving. There's got to be, a face to production. Should know who they are. Okay? And this is fun. Internal audits, management review, we're going to go to that in just a second here. I'm going to have a special thing on that there. But this one here, non-conforming, and this is all connected. Management review and improvements, non-conforming product, conformities, corrective actions, improvements, lost money, and so forth. And you have usually an agenda for your management review meeting. So this is the procedure I use for companies, and it's a one-pager. And as you can see, it's 9.3, section 9.3, and that tells me it's management review, right? And it's the purpose, the frequency. It says we're going to do it at least once a year. You say you do it monthly, right? Okay? And here's the input. The input is if you're doing a management review in accordance with 9.3, this is what you're checking right there, at a minimum. Because if I go to the standard, you're going to find 90% of that, right? Actions from previous audits. If I'm going to go in and do a management review, I want to find out whatever actions, because we have actions. There's a problem here, there's a problem there. We give them to Louis, Harry, Jenny, you know, solve it. So the next meeting, what's the status? If you don't do that, you're sort of getting behind the 8 ball. Because I guarantee you, if you don't address things right away, they're going to come and bite you in the butt. Right? How many people been bitten in the butt? And I mean that in a business way, okay? Okay, external and internal issues. Were there any real issues internally or externally that was detrimental to the way we operate, right? And then the next series here, A through G here, satisfaction, feedback, that's customer feedback. Quality objectives, did we meet our quality objectives? The measurements, were they realistic? And here's a key I do for quality objectives. What does it have to do with the company? Do we actually use that? Or do we just collect numbers? Right? We say quality objectives, yeah, if they get here, get, but what do we do with it? Is it really, we should only be collecting the quality objectives that we have to. And there's just a few that are defined in the standard. One of them is, it's always on-time delivery. That's always there, you know, and the rest you select, right? So what makes sense for your company? Conformity to product. What problems did we have on the production floor, right? So if you look at it, customer feedback, we're up in section 8.2. The extent of quality objectives, that's up above what, section 4, 5, right? Nonconformity and corrective actions, that's going to be both in the bottom. If it's a product, it's section, the end of section 8. If it's a other, then it's section 10, because it's a conformity, and so forth. Results, monitor and measurement, what the results are. Audit results, performance of external providers, how do our suppliers do? So you see there's something that we're going to get into when we talk about really auditing, and that's going to be terminology. If you don't understand the correct terminology as an auditor, and you're talking to an auditor or listening to an auditor, and you don't understand the terminology, symbols, and phrases that they use, you're in trouble. Because they're asking you something, and you may be interpreting something else, and you give them this crazy answer, right? And then it creates a little turmoil. You'll get it resolved usually, but it creates a lot of turmoil. Adequacy of resources. She's going to take a look and say, hey, listen, our balance here, we're missing some people here. In other words, our productivity and our production, we can't keep up with it. Why? Okay, where's our bottleneck? You guys have a bottleneck here? Or a constraint, they call it. That's usually the one that is the most time consuming to do. You know, in some companies it's, do you use temperature to heat treat or anything like that there, or season your stuff? Do you season anything in?
Like burning, we have a burning.
Yeah, burn-in time? Okay, that's usually a bottleneck, depending on, because you can only burn in so many at the same time, right? So that's sort of a bottleneck. So when you're talking about production and things like that there, it's usually based on your slowest point. That's the capability you have to produce something. Because you can have the other departments going crazy there, but when they get to the burn-in, they're going to be backed up, and you don't want that. Okay? Resources, effectiveness of actions taken. In other words, if we did any corrective actions and so forth, did they stick? So the system has to be designed. They'll ask you to say, oh, okay, you'll show them all these corrective actions and everything. And most guys like myself, I look at them and I look at similarities and I say, oh, wait a second. This one here, it seems like this same problem turns up about 4 or 5 times. You know, it's minor, you fix it real quick, but why does it keep turning up? You know, and that's my brain. So sometimes there's major things that happen where there's big dollar and man-hour losses, right? And then there's these small things that continually happen, and when you add them up, they basically overwhelm, you know, or basically were much, much worse than this big problem. Okay? Improvements, do we need opportunities for improvements? Obviously, we look at all this data and we determine that. Need for changes, that says EMS, which was the environmental management system, but it doesn't make any difference. It could be ISO, it could be this, that, right? Resources, do we need extra money or people or material, new equipment, right? And any implications for strategic direction change. In other words, if we had a massive change of who our clients are, we may have to take a look at the whole company and say, hey, geez, we're geared to do this here, but we're changing. We're going to take in something else. Like I see you got your solar energy there, and I don't know what the percentage is. What's your biggest percentage is gaming, but solar's pretty big probably, right? So, anybody? I see it on the wall there.
Yeah. Not like the direction.
Huh?
The energy.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a strategic change that could happen here. Because basically you could come up with some kind of component. One of these engineers here, if you turn them loose, them engineers, they'll come up with all sorts of crazy stuff, you know? And like just a short description, I was in one company that actually cut concrete cutters. The big saw blades, they were diamond tips, you know, and they would cut the concrete and stuff. And the engineer came in there. They had to have an engineer, and they've been in Western Saw. They've been in business a long, long time. And I came in there, and the poor guy said, geez, they hired me. You know, I've been here for a month. No one really knows what I'm supposed to do because they're so happy with this product, right? So I said, why don't you just go on the production site with them and figure out something. So he goes on the production site, and he finds out that they use water, you know, to keep it cool. They cut it, and they wind up with this slurry all over, you know, and then they have to clean up this slurry after they're finished cutting. And the engineer said, I'll do a wet vac, right connected to the cutter, right? And it turns out that what he did became a patent by the company, and they make more money with their patent selling the rights for other people to use that wet vac system than they do with selling their equipment. And it was all from just turning the engineer, and it's just so simple. No one ever did it before. This was what, 8 years ago, 10 years ago? Now you see everyone uses a cutter so you don't see a slurry. Anyhow, so there you are. That's what the management review looks like. So basically, the whole system for the auditor is to make sure that this is done. Because all the attributes in here are what they're looking at. They're looking at people, they're looking at performance, they're looking at data, they're looking at operations. questions. And the questions are key to the audit. In other words, if you remember the previous audit, the first thing the auditor is going to do is he's going to come in and find out what discrepancies you had the last time you were in here, and he's going to say, show me that these were fixed. And if you don't do that, you're going to get whacked around a little bit, right? QA has a black eye. What happened? Okay. Changes and trends in the company. They're going to look at the data and they're going to look for changes and trends. Is there something, just like you said, we may get, if turn one of them engineers loose, you may come up with something that is a simple addition to what you have now that could be a big seller. You never know, right? Objectives. He's going to say, let me see what your objectives are. Did you meet your goals? And if you didn't meet your goal, what's he going to ask you? Exactly. He's going to say, let me see the corrective action, what you do, right? And you'll be surprised how many companies are not as experienced as Joshua? Jason. I knew it was a J. I hate to say Jason because I always think of them scary movies. That's probably picked that name. Monitor and measure is the pulse of the company, like I said. They're going to look at the operations records. They're going to go through your sales orders, and they're going to make sure there's no blanks. And if there is a blank, I don't know how you do it here. Usually there has to be something in there. The omission of something is bad. You got to figure out some way to make sure that if there's nothing there, most of the time we just put NA, or it's not in the sales order, you know. But they'll be looking for everything. And then opportunities for improvement. They're going to say, what opportunities for improvement you have? And you're going to say, well, I'll tell you what, we've been working on this solutions for smart energy, and that's where we're heading. Our new direction is going to be, we're going to add a little bit more time to that to see if we can improve our face or our presence in the community in that area. Perfect. Okay? Auditor questions, they always interview the auditor. I mean the CEO. Because from his words, they determine whether he's behind the system or not. And most of the time, CEOs, they have their what do you call them? Like they're pretty good diplomats. They're like politicians, you know. They pretty well know because the auditor will prep them. Because you'll never see an audit finding against the CEO of the company. You won't see it. Because the ultimate responsibility for what's right or what's wrong is his. If he makes a decision that's wrong and it goes wrong, he's got to deal with the corporate maybe. But the auditor, the internal auditor, as long as we got a quality system, we addressed all these things and stuff like that, but usually they're pretty good. Because you automatically, you know, when they go in the CEO's office, he's going to say, oh man, I love these guys, I'm with them every day. I buy him lunch every day. You know, and I'm down there looking at the shop floor, I just want to make sure my company is really moving. And people say, who was that? Does he work here? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just messing around. Quality control, they're always breathing down his neck over there because he's got majority of the documentation because they're quality issues. Sales, he's going to look at the contract reviews. He's going to look at customer satisfaction. Right? That's what sales controls, all of that. The sales desk and so forth. Audit questions, like I said, customer satisfaction, RMAs, returns, and how they're processed and how we control them. Engineering, they're going to look at design and development. They want to see the input, the output. They're going to see how they plan it. They're going to see the verification and validation if they go in there for. Now they have the records. Now they specifically will not get into the design of the product. but they will look at input, output, everything that it defines in there. If you remember, was the planning, the input, the output, the verification, the validation, and so forth, you know, before it's released. They'll look at that. And then they'll track it through the rest of the company. And the customer in-service report of operation after shipment, that's something that's in there, and that's usually RMAs. When they come in, someone evaluates them. Either it's the operation side, if it's an operation issue, it's an engineering issue, the engineering side, right? If it's a mistake in the review of the customer contract, then they're in that side. They're going to look at the control of the operations, purchasing, how you monitor your suppliers. That's the biggest thing in the world, monitoring suppliers. We do? Okay. And shipping, final review of documents. They're going to make sure that that's shipping before it actually goes out the door. Remember, I talk about capture the problems inside the company. We don't want any escapes. Okay? No escapes. So when you're looking at the auditor, you know what he's looking for. And if you have any doubts, I'm all ears. I had a picture of me with big ears on there, but my wife says you're liable to offend somebody. I don't want to point out the person I'll probably offend, but I don't, no, I'm just kidding. Come on, man, you guys got to get serious here. So that's what we're looking at. Okay? So when I get into the standard, so let's talk about that. What department are you in?
Yes, inside sales.
Inside sales. So if I come to you, the first thing I'm going to say is, hi, my name's Joe. I'm coming in to do an internal audit here. You know, I'm coming in to do an international audit. And what's your name? How long you been doing this, Nicole?
10 months.
And I'm writing that down because later on I'm going to go over to her and say, hey, listen, Nicole, let me see her training file. And is she qualified? Where'd she come from? Okay? And then I'm going to ask you what you do, and you're probably, I don't know, what do you do?
Order entry procedure, customer service.
There you go.
And working with operations, getting orders done.
And then they always ask, the first couple, do you know what our quality policy is here? Did you receive an interview, not an interview, but an introduction to the ISO 9000 system when you came here?
Yeah, we went over it when we did the training in the beginning of the first
Now I'm going to ask the rest of the guys, and they're going to tell you where it is. Where's the quality policy? It's actually, they call it a vision.
Oh.
Okay?
Not here. Actually, for the policy here.
Where's your policy at?
It's in
In the
the system.
system, there's a computer system.
It's in the system. Okay. And usually the quality policy is going to be based on the standard. Standard says you need a quality policy that does this, 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 and this. Okay? So we got you on that one. No, they won't, you know, they won't mess with you. You know, because if things get really bad, you call for your supervisor.
Actually, yes, every time we do an audit, we ask that.
Yeah, every time.
Yeah.
So who else we got here? We had operations. Oh, operations. Production, engineering, same thing. If I asked you for, do you keep a software program with the input, output, and all that other stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can pull up any product. Who else do we got here? We got, who's that?
Purchasing.
We got purchasing. Yeah, purchasing, I'm going to come in and I'm going to look for a few things. Number one is how she gets the information of the quality clauses to the supplier and how she approves the supplier. You know, what's your process? I know that quality is involved in that, but he will ask you, how do you, well, can you control, how do you have your suppliers listed? Can you have some on probation or some that are on, some that are approved?
Supplier days.
When was the last time you disapproved a supplier?
They haven't.
You see, and it's usually to have something in your back pocket. Because the reality is when they say we never do, or I ask quality, I say, how many rejections did you have last year? Oh, we didn't have any. Now, you know, who you talking? I'm from Jersey City. Is there something across my head that says stupid? No, just kidding. But anyway, that's what it is. And who else we got back there? Who? Operations. So you were getting jobs out earlier today? No, I was just wondering why you were late. Okay, HR, you want to take note of that, please? Okay, any questions for me in your department? You want to know what I'll ask you? Just tell me what your department is. What's your department? Huh?
Sales.
Same thing then. Sales is how do you, you know, track your, and also monitoring, which is very interesting in sales. Do you monitor the amount of sales for your clients? And if they get down, what do you, if they start dropping off, what do you do? Huh?
Push that outside sales.
Yeah. Usually, here's a key. They're connected. You and him are connected over there. If by chance there's, or returns, RMAs, there's a lot of RMAs coming back, okay, from a particular product, you know, and we notice sales starting to decline and we know that it's not the industry, then the first question is, are they looking for another supplier? That's my brain. So I look for things like that, and I like to ask, has the sales been going down continually? Is it because they're just not building as much product on their end? No, they're building their sales. Their sales are still up there. Ooh. So that's something you would evaluate. You would say, hey, you don't want to lose them because of him. No, just kidding you. Who else we got here?
Yeah, we get the RMA.
The RMAs.
Yeah.
Yeah. The RMAs are good to track them because they turn into orders and reworks and this and that, so they all have to be done. Now for lost, here's a tidbit because I'm getting close here. Here's the thing, RMAs, really interesting. If I have RMAs that are coming in and I take a note and I say, geez, let's see, this RMA here, I have to rework it, or what do you normally do, rework or scrap and rebuild?
Repair.
Huh? Repair. Here's something interesting for the company when it comes to finances or CFO. If I repair something, how much does it cost? What's the dollar cents thing? What do you do? You said $75 last time? An hour? 95 an hour? 120? Okay. Now think about it. For him to repair it, that means that actually he's repairing it, right? Operations?
No, we don't repair. We have a repair technician.
Huh?
We have a repair technician.
We have a repair technician,
Yeah.
which is interesting because that means I would take a real good look at that. This is my brain. Don't get me wrong. I'm just, you know, because I'm old dude. Seen a lot, done a lot, right? My thing is, I ran into a company once that had a whole department that did repairs on paint jobs of products they built. They had like 7 people in there, and the company, it's not that big. And I'm saying, what's going on? Well, we coming up with these fish eyes in the paint. You customers don't like it. Fish eyes is when you paint and there's a little oil or something in there. It sort of makes a funny little thing. And if you're buying a product brand new, you don't want to see these defects in there, right? And I said, well, what do you got, you know, how long's this department been here? Oh, they've been here a year now. So I started saying, well, when did it start? It started a year ago? Yeah, it started, and then I checked in, and there was this maintenance guy who came on about a year ago, right? And I said, well, on this equipment here, what do you do that's different? And he said, nothing. But I'll tell you what, when I went in there, all these chains, because it pulled the parts through there and they would spray them, right? All these chains and all these mechanics here, no one ever oiled them for all these years, you know? So, you know, so I oiled them. So he had a maintenance thing to oil all these things. And what happened was, because it's hot in there, it's really hot when they paint, you know. And it's funny because the oil would drip down, so it would fly through the air, and them spray guns would spray, and they had all these. And so it's interesting. And so instead of looking for the root cause, right, they just went with the fix. And I'm not saying that that happens there, but if there was a reoccurring problem all the time that was going into the department, that department that fixes these parts, and it's the same type discontinuity, I would say, hey, wait a second, you know, what's going on here? Where is this originating from, the defect or discontinuity? Is it a supplier who supplied a part? Is it the technician who actually put it together, you see? That's what this is all about, auditors. We get into that stuff. Okay? And documentation. Okay. So that's really what I have. I'm hoping for a question or two. Nothing. You guys got to show me a little love here. That it? Or was I that good? That usually makes me go away. Oh yeah, you're really good, Joe. It's like my kids. Yeah, Dad, you're the best dad in the world.